There's a lot going on. All right, so folks, I'm here with my guy, my friend, my brother, Mark Martins, and we are here to talk about, parenting, a compassionate look at failure. Like what does that mean? A compassionate look at failure. But before we go into that, just want to tell my audience and a few things about you, Mark, and just to really introduce you, because we're gonna dive in deep, and get with us. If you have questions, put it in the chat section, as we will be taking those. But the question I want to initially ask you while talk about Mark is, what does it mean to you to be a compassionate parent, but how to look at failure, because we're going to be looking at how that it doesn't make sense when we say it out loud, but then it does, because we as parents really encounter times of failure, but at the end of the day, how we respond to failure, what do we do with it, is what matters. So about Mark is an independent certified coach, speaker, and trainer specializing in leadership, communication, as well as youth empowerment and development. Mr. Martins is also an experienced hospitality management consultant guru, and so I want you to welcome him. Give me the hearts, give me the likes, the thumbs up. This is a great brother, and we've been having many discussions about parenting, about life, and about next steps and how we play a part in it. And so, welcome, Mark. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. I won't even say this is the Live with Life show. It just it's just two brothers getting together.
Yes, my brother. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. It really means a lot to me.
So cool. So we was talking about this, a compassionate look at failure. Like, what does that mean to you?
Right. So at the heart of it for me is we have to retrain ourselves, if we don't already think this way, to see failure as an event, but not as the actual person. And I think that's where it all starts with, because, I think that most of us are like wired, and I know I was for a long time, to see failure as who I am. So when I failed at something, I attached it to my own identity as being me, as being who I am, as opposed to looking at it and saying, that's a mistake I made, that's poor judgment that I, executed, but it's not who I am at my core. It's not what I'm capable of. So it's very different. It's a very different dialogue, and it's a very different intention for us to set, to see failure as the event and not as the actual person.
Yeah. So do you think that we were, trained by our parents or people around us to react differently as it relates to failure? Or what influences us to say, oh man, I flunked that test, I'm not going to be able to do it again. I don't even want to try it again. What does that look like?
Well, I mean, we're all wired to want to achieve, so we're wired for achievement, for accomplishment. We're told by society, be the best you can be, strive to be better than everyone else, all these messages that are supposedly positive, but they can also have very negative undertones to them as well, and we learn this, like our parents learned it and our grandparents learned it as well too. And as we become a more evolved society, a more evolved world, we're learning to think differently and to question our beliefs, and to question beliefs that our parents did the best that they could with the information that they had. The parenting space, Kenston, as is full of judgment, and often it's mostly filled with judgment from the parents themselves, who are judging each other when it should be the opposite. So we're talking about compassion. So compassion goes to first, how the parents see themselves and the kindness and the grace with which they allow themselves to parent their children. But these are learned behaviors that we can, and learned beliefs that, failure is the most, is so negative. It's the end of the world. It's instead of seeing, okay, what can I learn from this failure? What, how can I approach this failure with compassion and with self-love for myself, and not allow it to define who I am. So it's learned behaviors that we can unlearn as long as we do the work.
Yeah. And it's so important. I mean, like you already given the nuggets, the keys to handling this thing, and us speaking against failure and learning from it instead of, allowing it to really take us down. Because as parents, we're almost the gatekeepers to how our children, our young people respond to it. And so they see us responding to failure in such a crazy way. And even when children experience failure, they react in a crazy way. What are we doing? We're just reteaching
Exactly.
how not to deal with failure in a positive way. Because that's what we have to do as parents. I got you.
And that's so powerful what you just said. And I just want to tag on to that. So Joseph Chilton Pearce said in his famous quote, "What we are teaches the child more than what we say. So we must be what we want our children to become." Yeah. And that's so true. So when you're thinking about, you may be giving your child all the right advice and all the right, guidance and instruction, but if your child sees you not having a healthy relationship with failure, with the way that you talk to yourself as a parent, or with the way that you navigate failure, regardless of what, good intentions you said and what positive information and positive affirmations you give them, what they're going to take from you is what they see you doing. They're going to model you. So that's where it's so critical. Like, our children cannot be more failure resilient than we are. So if we don't have that failure resilient mindset, then we can't expect our kids to have it. They're not going to have it either.
Wow. That's a lot to chew on. That's a lot to chew on. So you said something that led me to ask the question, to those who are out there watching, is, what is leadership to you? Because when we talk about leadership, me and Mark, we understand that it's real simple. It's influence, nothing more, nothing less. And we as parents, without us having to say anything, we still have to have the understanding that we are influencing our young people, either good or bad. And again, what we see, or what our children see, we have to be very aware of that, because that's what's going to play out once they leave the home. Once they go to school and they may experience some type of failure, they're going to remember how mom and dad reacted off of that failure, and then it's going to come out at school or at a friend's house, or during a football game or basketball, wherever it's going to come out. And so us having to understand it as leaders, we have to make sure that we are doing failure well, I guess.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. We have to make sure that we're modeling it for our children, modeling what we want them to do, because they are going to, they're going to do what they see us doing as opposed to what they hear us saying. You know what I mean? So we can give them all the best instructions in the world. But, parents, when I do parent workshops, and I get feedback at the end, I have the participants fill out a survey. What was your biggest takeaway? And usually 75 to 80% of them say that the biggest takeaway they got was that it's okay for them to fail. And these are not for their kids to fail, but for them as adults to fail. So if they're getting that from our workshops, then what is that saying? How are you parenting at home? What are behavior are you showing your kids? How are you shaming yourself? Which is something else that we should probably get into a little bit, is the whole process of shame versus guilt, because it's very, very different.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, what is the difference between shame and guilt?
Right. So shame is when you're attaching worthiness, of yourself. So like, you do something, let me give you an example. So if you made a mistake and you did something, shame for me would be like, Mark, you're a complete idiot. That's shame. Whereas guilt would be, Mark, you're a smart guy, but you made a really bad choice. So you see how one is basically identifying with our worthiness as a human being, which is shame, and it's attacking that worthiness. Whereas guilt is not attacking the worthiness, it's just looking at the choice that was made. So it's super important too. And again, just as we spoke about how we can't expect our kids to be more, failure resilient than we are as a parents. We also can't expect our kids to be more shame resilient than we are as a parent. So a lot of us as adults are shame prone, and we're shaming ourselves, and our child might, okay, so like our kid may get a bad, grade in an exam and come home, and we may say to our kid, you know what, it's okay. I know you tried your best, and I'm sure you'll do better. Let's work on it so you can get a better grade next time. But then we do something in the kitchen while we're fixing dinner, and we say, Mark, you're a complete fool. What an idiot you are. And our kids hear us saying this, and then our kid then says, but Dad, you're telling me that I'm good. It's just the action I did was wrong, but then you're beating yourself up. So they're doing what they're seeing us doing. So there's a conflict in what we're teaching them and what we're modeling for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So shame versus guilt. And in studies, just to really bring this home for the parents, by the age of 8, 9, 10, our kids have already formed whether they're shame prone or whether they're guilt prone. By the age of 8, 9, and 10. And, studies have shown from like people like Carol Dweck and Brene Brown, like renowned, researchers in the field, have actually shown that kids who are shame prone, who are told, bad Mark, bad boy, they go on to, they have a much greater chance of them getting involved in violence, in bullying, of them becoming suicidal, depressed, of them engaging in promiscuity and getting addicted, as opposed to children who are guilt prone and are told by their parents, Mark, you're a smart kid, but you made a bad choice. Let's talk about the choice you made. Those kids are much more likely to thrive in our society because they're not attaching their worth to the action.
Got you. Man, that's good. That's good. Listen, I ain't gonna touch that. You did well, man. So tell us about this law of the mirror.
Yeah, so it's like people model what they do. Kenston, you and I know this, right? I mean, and the thing is that as we talk about communication, how we communicate with our kids, the words we say only accounts for what? I think it's like 7% of the way that we communicate. Tone is 55%. Sorry, tone is 38%, and I think body language is like 55%. So the majority of the way that we communicate with people is through our, nonverbal cues, body language. So as parents, that's why, going back to that Joseph, Chilton Pearce quote, who we are is a much greater teacher to our kids than what we actually say to them, because they're modeling us. And if you're saying something to your child, but your body language is saying the opposite, your kid takes the body language cue any day over the words actually coming out of your mouth. So the law of the mirror is, people mirror what they see. And if your kid sees you shaming yourself, beating yourself up, if your kid hears you on the phone talking to your friend or your colleague and saying, I have to be better than so-and-so at work, I can't fail at work because then everybody will call me a failure, or your kid hears you having a fight with your spouse, and the dialogue that they hear and how they see you behaving, how they see you responding to those challenges in life, that is what they take from you. That's what they learn. They're constantly mirroring what we do as adults and what we do as parents. And a lot of times people don't realize that, how valuable that is.
Yeah. Parents, we gotta do better in this thing of failure, because we all fail at times, but it's truly how well we do it. Right? It's how well we come back from it, and move from it, and how we react. And again, keeping in mind what our children are seeing and hearing from us during that experience. And so, because failure does happen, Mark, it does happen. And so can you talk a little bit about what does forgiveness of self look like? Is it necessary? Is it meaningful for parents to forgive themselves?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely meaningful. As we mentioned earlier, the parenting space is full of judgment, and the biggest judgment comes from ourselves.
Mm.
So I mean, we have to forgive ourselves, and we have to realize that nothing is perfect. And as Brene Brown says, imperfect parenting to most parents means inadequate parenting. But
Mm.
imperfect is not, just because you weren't perfect, it doesn't mean that you're an inadequate parent. But I think most parents feel they have to be perfect. They can't fail their kids or fail themselves because their kids are watching. But
Yeah.
in those moments of imperfection is when you can teach your kids to give themselves that grace and that opportunity to not want to fail, but to give yourself permission to fail. There's a big difference
Yes.
between wanting to fail and giving yourself permission to fail. And as parents, when we do fail, or when they fail, they have to give themselves that grace and that forgiveness. And they have to also talk through that mental dialogue of that failure is not indicative of who I am as a human being, who I am as a parent. It is an event. It is a bad choice I made or a poor judgment, but it doesn't define who I am as a individual, as a parent, as anything. So we constantly have to be, as I call it, being kind to ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, and that's crucial. That is crucial that we be kind to ourselves. I could think of some different incidents that's happened in my parenting career where I may have gotten upset at my son and may have yelled while I yelled and yelled at him and raised my voice, but I was like, oh crap, like I don't want to break his spirit, and so after I'm calmed down, I go back and talk to him like, hey, I apologize. It was my fault. I let my emotions get the best of me and explain it. And we talk, we have a whole series about, anger and emotions, just so he knows that it's okay to have those emotions, but we got to have them under control, right? We got to be aware of them and to make sure that they don't overtake us all the time, and how to do conflict resolution well. But I want to go. I want to go not in a different direction, but on this line of forgiveness. Some parents probably right now, I know, are probably faced with a specific situation. And I'll go say what's happening right now around the world, a crisis, a racial crisis. And so they're probably thinking they have failed as it relates to helping their young people learn about race and being taught to be, respect every race, every person as a human being. And they're like, dang, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I take, my children to a diverse neighborhood, or why didn't I have them engage in diverse activities, or, such things? And so what do we say to that to help parents get through that? Because at the end of the day, we don't want them to think that they failed at it, but we want them to see it as, okay, there's an opportunity, right?
Right.
Through
Exactly.
any crisis, there's an opportunity for us to do better. Now that we know better, it's time to do better, right? So everything you then said was, don't be so, strong on yourself, to give yourself grace. But then, I'm sorry, I'm answering all the questions. But give yourself grace to say, okay, I know better. I must do better. How can I do better? And if, and if your children are grown adults, you can still have the conversations.
Exactly, Kenston.
Yeah.
And if I could just say this, I completely agree with like what you're saying. And instead of focusing on what they didn't do and the conversations that they didn't have, start right now. Start having those conversations. It's never too late to start having the conversation. It's never too late to sit in a space with your children where you can be vulnerable with them. Because to me, vulnerability is, takes massive courage and it shows massive strength. And sit with your children, be vulnerable, and say, I did what I knew how, or I did what I was taught, but now I know that there's a better way, and there are things that I haven't taught you that I want to teach you, that I want you to learn. So just as, I want you to always be striving to be more and do more, I also, as your mom or as your dad, need to also be more and do more for myself and then for you. So let's have that conversation now.
That's good. That's good. So parents, y'all heard it. It doesn't matter if you didn't talk about it for the first 5, 6, 10 year, 12 year, 15 years of the child's life. Have the conversation now. And I said it in my, I alluded to in my TEDx towards the end, was that parents start as early as possible doing these things, having these conversations. It's almost like the conversation about sex. Parents don't like talking to the kids about sex. But the earlier they start talking about it, the easier it will be. It's uncomfortable, when a kid gets a certain age to talk about sex, or it's uncomfortable period to talk about it, but it's easier if you start having the conversation the younger and on the way up. And so the same thing as we're talking about with race, talk about race, talk about, the effects of injustice, and at a young age, because kids start to know race as early as 3 years old. They start figuring this thing out real quick, like, they don't look like me.
Yeah,
and so,
exactly. Yep.
And so it's for parents to be okay with being uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, exactly. Kenson, you're right. It's about taking the uncomfortable and making it comfortable. Yeah. And, the other point that you raised that I really like is that you said, when you start younger, it's easier. And that's true. But the other side to that too is that if you're not having those conversations, then you're also sending a message to your kids that they can't approach you with those conversations either. See, and that's something really important. If you're not willing to have the conversation, and your child may have the idea or the thought in their mind, because like you say, from 8, 9, 10, those kids already have judgments of their own. They're already seeing kids and wondering, well, he or she looks different to me, and they're treated differently. So they're forming their own basis, of opinions, their own beliefs. And if mom and dad are not having the conversation and actively making what's, uncomfortable comfortable, then, the child says, hey, this is not something that we talk about. So they don't talk about it either. So nobody talks about it.
So that's good. So I know we hit it on the head, the parallel, because again, the uncomfortable conversation about sex is just like the uncomfortable conversation about race. If we as parents don't talk about it with our young people in a safe space, which the safest space that they talk about sex and race is in the home, they're going to learn it from somebody else that may not have their best interest. Because we're seeing it on the news where kids, elementary school age, they, one elementary school had the N-word written on the wall, the bathroom wall in the elementary school. So if they don't have the conversations at home about respect, empathy, and respecting each other's race, then they can get taught by somebody at school whose parents have taught them how to hate and think that is okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And and by doing that, by not having those conversations and by not allowing ourselves to make the uncomfortable comfortable and making it the normal as it should be in the home, to have those uncomfortable conversations, but do it in a very, vulnerable, compassionate way. There's that word compassion again. By us not doing that, we're also almost creating this division between us and our children, where our children then feel, well, hey, I can't approach mom or dad with this information, so I have to learn it elsewhere.
Yeah.
And then there's, there becomes, over time that turns into our children becoming more and more like detached from us and becoming more and more independent, and maybe too independent, more than they need to be at that stage in their life.
Yeah. And so what we're really talking about is we need to, as parents, continue to build relationships with our young people. And these necessary conversations I call them necessary. They're uncomfortable, but they're necessary conversations should happen, and it should build your relationships with your young people. You know, last night I watched a video somebody posted of the young lady. Seemed like she was probably a teen or a young adult, and she was telling her mom about, you know, racism, and the dad wasn't even trying to listen to her. She was trying to educate them on what injustices has happened in the Black community, and they weren't having it. The parents were saying they should do better. They should be respecting their neighborhood, and they should be doing this and that. But she says, Mom and Dad, but they're getting killed. Do you care about their lives? No, I mean, it's not about that. It's about them. And I said, so there's people out there having these conversations, but the parents ain't listening.
Mm-hmm. And the parents also don't realize that they can learn from their kids, because, you know, we can talk about this, you know, that leads me into this other topic. The parents are living from the head space more than from the heart space. They're trying to do everything right, and they're trying to be perfect, and they're trying to not fail at anything. But by doing so, they're forgetting some of the most critical elements, you know, allowing yourself to be vulnerable for your children and with your children, showing compassion, showing empathy, allowing your child to come to you, and allowing yourself to be humbled enough to say, I can learn from my child as well.
Yeah.
And if my child has something to say, let me listen openly with an open heart. Let me come out of my head for a while, come out of the ego. I'm the parent, you're the child. I know everything and you have to learn from me. Yeah. Let me go into the heart space and say, okay, what do you have to share with me? You know, what can I learn from you?
Yeah. Listen, that's good. And I only say, you know, parents, those who are watching, listen to your young people because they are some of the greatest teachers. I mean, I've learned so many lessons from my son. You know, he's only 12, but I've been learning them since he was born, right? On how to do things better, how to parent better. And so, yeah, have the conversation. There's a couple books that I'll say for parents who want to teach their kids about racism. One of them is called A Kid's Book About Racism. Just look it up, A Kid's Book About Racism. And so they break it down to its simplest forms and talk about it. And so you can start there, but start looking up videos. Start looking at, there's TEDx's out there, there's other videos, there's so many books about race that you can begin to have these conversations. You know, of course, you know, depending on the brain level or the age of the child, learn about it, educate yourself, and then have a conversation and choose to be curious all the way through. Choose to be curious, choose to empathize, be compassionate, like my good brother said, and have those heavy talks, right? Those talks that they're not all fun and games, but they're necessary. They're necessary to us impacting the world. And so, Mark, I'd like to thank you for joining me, because this is necessary that our parents be compassionate towards themselves and their failures, so that way their young people are influenced in the right way. And we don't want to continue the cycles of if you had a bad parent, we don't want to continue that cycle onto our young people, because if we look deep within ourselves and see what we've been through, why would we want our children to experience the same thing?
Exactly. Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. So, Mark, what would you like to leave with the good people today, the parents in the world?
Well, first of all, I want to honor, you know, the parents that are watching this and that will watch this later on, because there is no manual for being a parent, as you know, Kenston. And, so you are going to be a, imperfect parent, but that does not mean that you're a inadequate parent. Really important to remember that. And the second thing is that, failure and acceptance of failure and understanding the value of failure towards success starts with the parent owning that and the parent accepting that as in their own life. So just remember, to the parents out there, what you do and how you act is the greatest influence on your child's life. And, be kind to yourself as parents. Give yourself grace. Give yourself those moments of forgiveness when you do fall short of the mark that you set for yourself. But also remember that failure is the event and it's not the person. I really want to bring that home again, because that's so critical. Because if we keep failure as an event, not as a person, we don't allow it to become part of our worth or the way that we see ourselves.
That's good. That's good. Man, yeah, we could be talking about this for a long time.
Yeah, we could be. Yeah, we can go on for hours on this, my brother.
Well, man, I appreciate